everyone, and welcome back to the NXpress Nintendo Podcast, the official Nintendo podcast of GoombaStomp.com. I'm your host, Cameron Daxon. Joining us, we have games editor Marc Kaliroff.
The Gigabells have tolled.
As a sad day for us all, of course, we also have indie games editor Campbell Gill.
My heart is breaking as I watch Mario solemnly walk up to the guillotine, his last moments before him. So
yes,
sad.
The bagpipes are playing, and of course, joining us all the way from Boston, we've got Matthew Ponthier.
The thrill of the hunt. Mario doesn't know what's going to hit him.
So wait, is he being executed? Is he being hunted? Like, what's going on with Mario?
I mean, either way, he's dead at the end of the day, right? So
yeah, that's true. As has been widely reported. We are, of course, referring to the fact that the Mario 35th anniversary celebration is ending on March 34th at the time of this recording. March 31st. I believe it sounded like I said March 34th. It's not what I meant. This is the 31st. So there's going to be no more Super Mario Bros. 35. There's going to be no more Mario Bros. 3 triple pack 3D All-Stars available for eShop downloads. There's going to be no more Fire Emblem Shadow Dragon and the Blade of Light, which has nothing to do with Mario, but that's also apparently the day they decided to stop selling that game on the eShop. So what we're trying to say is it's kind of a little bit of a disappointing time for fans of those particular games who are hoping to buy them not up until March 31st. How's everybody feeling about this arbitrary decision?
I could not have said it better myself.
Yeah,
sucks.
Yeah, it sucks. It's kind of an odd choice by Nintendo. We've covered it extensively on the show. It's not the best thing in the world. It's a little bit of a disappointing decision. But you know what? Apparently, it's driving those impulse sales. So we'll see if if the impulse sales will bear more fruit than the longer term shelf life would have done. I guess I'm so curious. What do you think you guys are going to do with the hard copies of Mario 3D All Stars?
Obviously, we're going to build a coffee table.
They build a coffee table, they throw them on the pyre, they burn them. Like, I don't know what the deal is with that.
I feel like we're going to have like that E.T. Atari 2600 game situation where they just bury they just bury them out in the desert, and then it spells the end of the games industry. So the death of Mario is the death of gaming as we know it. So
oh my gosh, yeah, it's disappointing. I mean, we all saw it coming. Like, the one thing that Nintendo was pretty clear on is right when they announced it, we're like, hey, this is only going to be available for these 6 months or whatever it was. So it's not like this is just a completely out of the blue decision. It has this kind of inevitable sense of sadness to it, I guess. But that's not the only disappointing thing happening with Nintendo news. I, just this morning, finally got fed up with my Joy-Cons drifting. Or my left Joy-Con specifically, I should say, drifting. And I decided to send it in for repairs. Have any of you guys done this before? I'm not sure what to expect.
I need
Not
to.
yet.
Yeah.
We're all kind of experiencing that, but not all of us have taken the next step.
Correct.
Yeah.
yeah, what happened for me is when my Joy-Cons first started drifting, it was before Nintendo did the whole repair service offering. So I literally just had to get rid of my old Joy-Cons, buy some new ones, and then like the next day they announced the complimentary repair service, and I was like, well, great. So that was my experience.
Right. Well, I think the thing I'm going to still have to do is buy a backup pair of Joy-Con, just because what else am I want to still be able to play while I am waiting for them to be repaired, because I'm not sure how long the repair is going to take. Like, I've heard wildly varying reports just based on the internet, based off of Reddit.
I think it'll be fast for you because you're in you're in California, so it's like, Redmond, Washington is up north.
True. Yeah, that's true. Not too far away.
No, they know you're from Goomba Stomps. Like, oh, this guy VIP status right here. You gotta get his Joy-Cons
send it
back
to the front of the
ASAP.
line. Yeah, this guy's got to play some Nintendo games. Quick. We need the fast turnaround. No, but I know that. In particular, I know my wife is going to be wanting to play Ring Fit Adventure in the meantime, so it's like I guess I'm going to need to buy a backup pair, which I kind of should have gotten a backup pair anyway at this point. Like, I've had the Switch for a couple of years, and I only have the Pro Controller and my one set of Joy-Con that it came with. So it's like, all right, I guess it's time to get a backup set, just in case. Once this pandemic's over, we can finally have people over to play some 4-player games, they'll want to pass around the Joy-Con. I guess the real question is, what color should I get my backup pair to look like?
I have a better answer. You should get what edition, and it should be the Zelda.
I was just going to say the same thing.
The recently announced Zelda ones. I kind of want to try to find a pair of those Animal Crossing ones. I don't know if they sell them just
those are hard to find.
Are they hard to find?
Yeah, they're only with the system.
Is it only with the system? I thought maybe they sold them separate. Damn. Oh, well. Well, maybe I'll just have to find alternative methods. That makes it sound like I'm going to do something shady.
Just go to the dark web, steal some Joy-Cons.
I got to go to exactly. That's the only move. Yeah. And of course, one final. Again, this is the Cameron nitpicks hour. Recently finished playing through Balan Wonderworld.
Oh, you finished it?
Listen, I don't know if it's possible to actually finish this game.
Okay.
I beat the 12 main levels and the final boss. And after you do that, there's like some extra stuff that's unlocked. I think it is safe to say that I'm done with this game.
Emotionally, physically,
all of it. It stressed me out. I don't usually when I play video games, I don't like get mad at the TV. This game caused me to yell at the TV, and I feel bad for my neighbors who had to deal with me going like, "Come on!" like just screaming with frustration, sweating, trying to execute the maneuvers I needed to execute just because the controls were not what I was hoping they would be. It's a rough one, guys. It's a rough game. That said, it's not as egregiously bad as some other people are making it sound, at least in my opinion. It's a 3D platformer that's not a Mario game, so just take anything with it with a grain of salt is kind of my broad view opinion of Balan Wonderworld. But look for the full review at a later time. None of you guys have messed around with this yet, right?
No, but I do have a question for you. Now that you're reviewing the game, will you review the novel?
There's a novel?
There's a novel.
Okay, sorry, what?
Yeah, so apparently Yuji Naka didn't want the game to like focus on story. He wanted to focus on gameplay, which clearly a mistake already.
Well, listen, I'll tell you what, there's certainly no story.
Yeah, so the whole story of the game is actually in a novel with like the backstory and everything of the main character.
I guess
like Balan or like the protagonist you play as?
Oh, I have no idea. All I know is it's probably as bad as the game.
So wait, are you saying that this is like a true Square Enix situation where you have to buy like 20 other peripheral things to actually understand what's going on?
Yeah, but in this case, by the time you play through 1 hour of Balan Wonderworld, you'll be running away screaming and never know of the novel's existence. So
I mean, this is the first time I've heard of that. It's a straight up novel. It's not a graphic novel.
Nope, straight up novel. I think it's like 400 pages or something.
Oh my god! Wow. What?
Who wrote this?
So Mark, it sounds like
let's do a quick Google.
I can't really review the game until I read the novel. It sounds like.
Oh, of course.
Oh my god! Wait a second. Is this? Yeah, we're all looking this up.
In the meantime, Cameron, I have a question for you also.
Please,
so
go
this
ahead.
is kind of like. This is well known as kind of Yuji Naka's swan song in a way. Like he's gone on record saying like, if this doesn't work out, then like I'm done. So he went into this clearly with a vision and an idea. Does that come through at all? Do you see like some sort of just like pie in the sky that just did not pan out at all? Was there any like sort of
the ideas are good. Listen, the ideas around this game I think are frankly solid. Like it's a 3D platformer. Kind of in the vein of Mario Odyssey in that each world, each level has different like outfits you can wear and those bestow different movesets upon your character. It's like, all right, yeah, this is a decent idea. However, through I don't know what you want to call it. I think it comes down to poorly thought out design. So pretty much every action that you perform in this game is performed with one button. It's like a one-button game, which is like, okay, that's kind of a cool idea. Whether that's, you're a little jellyfish and you can electrocute people around you. Great, you press the A button. You're a little sheep and you can puff up and float away on clouds. Great, same button. However, what that does in practice is that a lot of movesets just don't have a jump button because that button is tied to whatever their action is. So it's a 3D platformer. Half the little outfits you find, your little guy can't jump. Like, just let that sink in for a second. Isn't that crazy? Like,
and there's also like 7 other buttons that could be available for.
There's an entire controller's worth of buttons, and none of them are used. You use the right thumbstick for camera, left thumbstick for movement, and everything else is tied to a single button.
Cameron, would you like to know more about the book?
Listen, I'm gonna buy it right now. Don't even worry about it. Like real talk, I will buy this book and I will review it for the website 100%. I'm gonna do it.
It was
right
written
now.
by 4 people.
Yeah, it was. Yuji Naka,
including
so
all
good.
of Square Enix. Apparently.
Oh, I'm sorry, 5 people. 5 people wrote this thing.
And I'm
This
sorry,
is-
a corporation is listed as one of the authors as well. Arzest Corporation.
It's
Maybe that was the translating company, I'm
280
not sure.
pages.
Maestro of Mystery, Theater of Wonders. You guys, I gotta read this book. I'm buying it.
The synopsis is, though you might not remember, you've been to this theater many times before. One day, just as it does for you and for all, it appears to an aloof boy and a warm-hearted girl in their time of greatest need. Through its doors.
I mean,
It says nothing about the book. They embark on an adventure into the magical land that dwells within our hearts, Balan Wonderworld.
Well, that sounds about right.
I'm just saying, I feel like there's a reason why I've tried to forget that I've been to this theater so many times before.
Well, it's interesting. So it's like, again, I don't want to get too off topic. The idea of this opening segment was like things that have disappointed us lately regarding Nintendo stuff. So, at the end of the day, Balan Wonderworld, I was disappointed with the experience of playing the game. You can look for the review at some point soon. So, we were talking last week about Persona 5 Strikers. A lot of the stuff around this game is very Persona vibes. Like you're visiting different people who have manifested their tragedies and insecurities into these levels that you explore and these bosses that you fight. So it's on that level, it's very Persona-y. But then the execution is just completely bad. Unlike the finely tuned Strikers or the Persona 5 main RPG, this one just falls flat in terms of execution. But the ideas are solid. I don't know. I think if you see it on sale and you're genuinely curious to see what it's all about, maybe give it a look. I think there's a free demo still. Just if you want to get a sense of like what I'm talking about in terms of just how rough it feels to move around the world, like maybe check out the demo. It's half an hour of your time. But
what are we considering a sale price for this game? Like, are we talking bargain bin, like $5?
I would call it.
Or?
I would say, look forward to the bargain bin, guys.
Yeah,
It's
I don't think
great.
it'll take too long. Don't think it'll take too long.
It's gonna be one of those. It'll drop in price pretty soon, I'm sure.
Oh, it'll be on sale on PSN next week, tops.
Yeah, you're probably right about that. All that being said, I don't want to end it too much on a dour note. So obviously, we there is some stuff that's disappointing. They're pulling stuff from the eShop. Balan Wonderworld is no good. Joy-Cons tend to drift after extended use. But there is light at the end of this tunnel in the form of the massively popular, top-selling, record-smashing Monster Hunter Rise, which we brought Matt on to talk about. So we're going to take a quick break and come back and talk about Monster Hunter Rise. So stay tuned. Monster Hunter Rise, destroying the eShop, just sold out all over the place. One of the top-selling games, it probably will be the top-selling game of the year, unless unless Zelda does phenomenally well in the fall. What's the deal with Monster Hunter Rise, Matt?
Yeah. So it's pretty simple in that you got all these new fans that came on board for World. Like it took away the load screens. It streamlined a lot of the processes, and a lot of new people finally jump into the series that they'd heard so much about and fall in love with it. And now you got this new game on the Switch, and as we see, you put something on the Switch, it tends to do pretty well. And I think Monster Hunter returning to a handheld platform, despite the whole COVID situation right now, it feels right. It definitely feels right because Monster Hunter is such a social game in its multiplayer aspect. And so the fact that it's got the best of both worlds, being on handheld and a home console system at the same time, it's just driving gangbusters. It's just riding that momentum. Capcom has not let their foot off the Monster Hunter pedal at all, because right up until Monster Hunter Rise launched, they were still releasing content for Monster Hunter World Iceborne. Capcom has not let its foot off the gas on the Monster Hunter hype train for a second, and it is paying off in big boy bucks for sure.
Big boy bucks, exactly. Yeah, it's funny. It's always interesting to hear about a series that I personally am not very familiar with, to hear that it's like, oh no, this is one of the most popular things out there. Mm-hmm. It's like, it kind of reminds me of hearing about Pokemon for the first time in the late 90s and being like, oh no, there's this entire other subculture that exists and it's going to take over the world. It feels sort of like what's going on with the Monster Hunter franchise, in terms of it coming to the Switch and making a big splash. So hopefully that means good things for the Monster Hunter Stories game coming out soon too.
Right, yeah. I'm definitely really interested to see how that pans out, because we've seen 2 trailers of it now, but we still don't know exactly how the gameplay will be. But if anything, the first Monster Hunter Stories, it was vaunted for having a great story, true to its name, but its combat wasn't that great for an RPG game. So I'm very curious to see what they do to fix that in the second game, for sure.
Yeah, I'm not familiar at all with with that, particularly that what do you call it? That's kind of the subgenre of the Monster World stuff, the stories aspect.
It's a spin-off, basically. Yeah.
It's a spin-off, exactly. There you go. So I'm not familiar with the spin-off even a little bit. So we'll see how it does. I know that Capcom's kind of betting big on okay, well, if Rise is a success, hopefully that'll carry over into stories. So I feel like that's a pretty safe bet. I don't know.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Like I said, Capcom has been very masterful in just continually keeping Monster Hunter in the mind share of just video game enthusiasts everywhere. Even for you guys, not having played it, not being a part of it, it's just constantly in your peripheral vision, and you're aware of it, when that definitely was not the case pre-World. A lot of people did not know what Monster Hunter was, or didn't even have a vague idea of it.
And one thing that I think is pretty interesting about the incredible growth and success of Monster Hunter in the past few years is not just the success for this series, but then the effects that that's going to have on the rest of Capcom's output. In particular, I'm really interested in how Stories does, because it has been years since Capcom has put out a traditional role-playing game. And as somebody who's been I've been poking around with Breath of Fire and those old RPGs that Capcom used to make, I'd be really interested to see if Monster Hunter Stories is a hit, if that encourages Capcom to maybe go back into role-playing games and maybe start exploring, more development, more different kinds of games encouraged by that kind of success. So it'd be interesting to see what kind of effect that has going forward.
Absolutely.
Oh man, if they remade or remastered Breath of Fire, that would be so cool. Those games are good, guys. But that being said, we're not talking about Breath of Fire. We're talking about Monster Hunter Rise. So Matt's I imagine you've been playing it since it got released last week. Is that right?
Yeah, exactly. I haven't been
Awesome.
able to play as much as I want to, but I've played a fair amount still for
There's
sure.
never enough time. Never enough time. That said, so we all talked about a month ago, or however long it was ago, maybe 6 weeks, about the four of us playing through the demo together. So none of us have picked up this game since the demo. At least I haven't. I don't want to speak for you guys. But Matt, did you play through the demo more times? Did you or were you just like, okay, I'm just gonna play the demo one time, and then once the full game comes out, I'm gonna dig in? Like, how did you? What was your approach?
So I dug back into the demo when they released the hard mode for it, the
Yes,
Magnamalo
yes.
hunt, and got my ass handedly handed to me multiple times, like multiple people did. And although that was to be expected, they did the same thing with the Monster Hunter World demo back when they released Nergigante. They just overtuned that to hell and back because they really want to give you a feel of like the teeth that Monster Hunter can provide, essentially. Except I feel like they maybe had tuned that a little bit much. So yeah, I was not able to beat the Magnamalo in the demo, but yeah, I went back to the demo to give that a shot and just try to hone my skills a little bit more ahead of the full game release.
Nice. So those high level hunts, are you not at that point in the game yet?
Not yet, no. I have gotten to the point where I fought Magnamalo again, and he's such a pushover compared
Oh,
to the
really?
demo version. It was like sweet, sweet revenge.
That must feel pretty good.
Yeah, for sure.
So yeah. So I mean, what's your experience kind of diving back into the series on the Switch? Are
Yeah.
you enjoying it just as much as previous games? What are your thoughts?
So yeah, my thoughts are ever since Monster Hunter 4 on the 3DS, every flagship Monster Hunter game has innovated or added some sort of mechanic to where you can't imagine a Monster Hunter game without it. So Monster Hunter 4 on the 3DS added verticality and riding monsters or mounting monsters. Not the same way in Rise, but like in previous Monster Hunter games, there was no like jump attacks or anything like that. Like the maps were very flat, so on and so forth. World got rid of loading times and like instant zones to where everything was just like one seamless area. It revolutionized how players interact with each other, gave a weapon tree, and so you don't have to refer to a wiki, things like that. Like now, load times are a thing of the past as well. And so with Rise, we add the wirebug mechanic, and
Right.
I cannot imagine a Monster Hunter game without the wirebug mechanic now. Adds a whole new level of fluidity to the movement that Monster Hunter games have never even come close to approaching in previous games whatsoever. Like it, from the way you move about the environment to the way you engage with monsters, wirebugs completely change up the game. And the really interesting thing about them is just how well they're incorporated to each weapon type too, whether it's covering for one of their weaknesses or really playing to one of their strengths. For example, like great swords or switch axes that are known for being like not very mobile. One of their wirebug moves is kind of like a short range dash, gives them a little bit more mobility. Whereas like the insect glaive, it just really amps up its aerial game to 11 with its wirebug moves. And so I'm just extremely impressed by how seamlessly they integrated this new mechanic in such a way that even after having only played for only quote unquote for a Monster Hunter game 10 or so hours so far, it's I can't even think back. I can't even remember playing a Monster Hunter game without it. It's
Wow.
truly revolutionary for the series.
Yeah, having expanded mobility in a game like that, I imagine is just a complete game changer. It's like I'm trying to think of a comparable example. It's like putting Mario in 3D. You know what I mean? It's like it just completely changes the move set. I imagine it's quite good,
Right.
especially for this kind of a game. So that's awesome.
Yeah, absolutely. You mentioned Mario 3D and something like Mario Odyssey. I'm thinking of I think there are comparisons that can be made to Mario Odyssey and Breath of the Wild, and that the wire bug mechanics also open up exploration as well, because the wire bugs tied into that, you can wall run basically and run up any wall you see, similar to Breath of the Wild. You can climb up any wall you see, and that adds an element of exploration to these hunts as well. Whereas in previous Monster Hunter games, like, okay, there's a monster, I go to it, I fight it, I win, I conquer, I conquer, I leave. and there wasn't really a reason to go out of your way to explore the zones outside of like finding like alternate camps to set up in, and that's still there in Rise. But what I found is that because of this wirebug mechanic and wall running mechanic, similar to in Breath of the Wild and Mario Odyssey, I might just see something in a map. I might see a tall mountain. There's a map in Rise called the flooded forest, and there's this giant pyramid in it, and I just saw it, and before I even hunted a monster, I'm like, I want to climb that. I had no reason to climb it. I'm just like, I'm gonna climb that because I can. And I got to the top of it, and they had just a nice little relic, a nice little little lore piece that you can find, and it was just a nice little intrinsic reward that I really appreciate. There was nothing telling me that there was going to be something at the top of that pyramid. I just went up there because I wanted to, and I was rewarded for that. I love those kinds of rewards, and those rewards have been largely absent from Monster Hunter up until this point. So it's very, very interesting.
I have a theory. This is probably 100% wrong. I wonder if, because I feel like that's a very Nintendo thing, like the idea of being rewarded for exploration, right?
Yes.
Not like it's exclusively Nintendo. Obviously, it's not. But I feel as though that's a thing that a lot of people expect from like your Marios, your Zeldas. Oh, you know what? I see the top of that tower. I bet if I get up there, there's probably a Korok Sea. There's probably a Power Moon, whatever. So I wonder if there's a little bit of that, because this is the Switch version, a little bit of that kind of bleeding into Monster Hunter Rise. I don't know. It's just a little fan theory.
Yeah, I do think they took inspiration from those games. Absolutely. Another little aspect of it is, like, if you think back to Super Mario Odyssey, again, like, there are some areas that, even though your movement is so great, like, there are some really tough areas that you can get to by some really fancy shenanigans. And so you pull that off, and you get to the top of this, like, structure in Mario Odyssey. It's like, aha! I bet Nintendo did expect me to get up here. It's just like, pile of coins, boop. Doesn't really mean anything, but it's just like, no, we knew someone could get up here. Here's your reward. Doesn't really
it's
mean
like
anything.
we see you. Yeah, we
and
see
so
you down there.
It's the same for Monster Hunter, where just because now that you can go anywhere you see, it's really strange to be able to just not encounter invisible walls in the Monster Hunter game. And so it's just like there have been so many instances where I've just gone somewhere because I wanted to, and thought like I don't think I'm supposed to be here. And then they'll just be like a tiny little gathering point. Again, doesn't mean anything, but it's just like, no, like we expected players to come out here just because of their curiosity. And it's just a really interesting thing to see in a Monster Hunter game, that it really adds to the experience because it makes it feel like, despite the previous game being called World, it makes Rise feel more like a living, breathing world in that regard.
Oh, wow. Yeah, that's incredible. I'm so happy for you, Matt. I think that's great. So I've heard a little bit. I'm curious if you want to weigh in here. So I know we talked about this during demo times. There has been a little bit of a back and forth on the internet about how whether or not this game is a quote unquote good starting point for a newcomer. Do you have more opinions about that? I mean, again, I know we sort of talked about this when we all played the demo together. I don't know. Have your thoughts or feelings changed about that kind of thing?
Yeah. So my initial thoughts when playing this, and it might be skewed because I've been playing Monster Hunter for so long, but I get the feeling that the opening part of this game, also known as low rank, is the easiest low rank of a Monster Hunter to date. It definitely feels like that to me, where like in previous Monster Hunter games, especially World, I wasn't able to just blaze through low rank with basically the starting gear, and yet I was able to do that here. And again, like I am a Monster Hunter veteran, so there is that, but even despite that, I feel like it's very easy. That said, Rise, I feel like doesn't teach the players the basics as well as World did. I think it throws a lot at the players at once to kind of get the hang of, and then it says, here are some tutorial quests over on the side that you can take care of if you want to, which I definitely prefer that approach to where you don't do all the tutorials, you make some of them optional. But at the same time, I think there needed to be a little bit more hand-holding on which of these tutorials are actually important, and other things like explaining what certain terms are, explaining the importance of sharpness, explaining why affinity is important, things like that. And that's before you even get into the user interface, which I think is definitely a step back from World in regards
really?
of navigating how to set up an online lobby, how to play with others, what accepting via join request means, and things like that. It's not very clear. Like if you just want to jump into the game and hunt with your friends without granted, if you're ignoring everything the game says, it's partly on you. But if you take it in that regard, it's not intuitive at all. Like without someone telling you you have to go and talk to this specific cat in order to open up an online lobby, it would be really hard to figure out. And just differentiating the two. And the other thing I think is a step back from World is the fact that single player and multiplayer quests are separated again. Whereas in World, single player and multiplayer, it was all the same. Like all the quests were the same. You didn't have to worry about progressing each of them individually. And that was new for World, in fact. Every previous Monster Hunter game up until that point, single player quests and multiplayer were kept separately and their progression systems were separate. Rise returns to that system. One reason I think is to address the complaint from World that if you wanted to play with people, they had to go and like start the quest on their own and then see the cutscene before other players could come in. That was a major complaint from World.
Oh, sure, yeah.
And so to sidestep it, they have these multiplayer only quests where you don't have to worry about that. But now I feel like that was kind of like almost a scorched earth policy, because I'm not a fan of having to progress both those separately. For example, like if you just focus on single player for a while, it's like, okay, cool. And then you go to multiplayer and you're essentially, even though you're carrying over your gear, you're starting from square one. You're starting from 1-star quests again, fighting the great Izuchi and just the really chump monsters and working your way up through high ranks. And I don't see why it has to be that way. So in that regard, I know the question was how approachable is this to newcomers, and I just think that is more confusing than it needs to be, especially because they're called village quests and hub quests, and that can definitely turn people around. It's like, wait, which one's single player, which one's multiplayer? So yeah, I think all in all, what it comes down to is this game could do better communicating exactly how players interact with it. As far as teaching you how to play the game, it does a fine job, like in terms of how the wirebugs work, what you can do with them, how to ride the monsters. But in terms of progression, how to set up with other people, what are the important things to look out for when building an armor set or looking to build a weapon, it's very hands-off in that regard. And I think newcomers would still need a helping hand from either a veteran or just someone else to be going through with them and learning with them in order to grasp.
Sure. Well, so I guess the question is not, is this a good Monster Hunter game for newcomers? Because like clearly there's a lot of newcomers. Like
Right. Yeah.
like they succeeded. Like they did it. So perhaps here's a little curveball I'm going to throw you. Do you have any of those little basic tips for somebody who's like, I've heard this game is extremely popular. I've heard it's really good. People are comparing it to Breath of the Wild. People are saying it's an incredible new Switch game. I just bought it. I feel overwhelmed. Like, would you encourage people to like, hey, go look at the subreddit? Go, do you like, is there any particular guides you would point to? Or is it like, just read everything in the game? Like, I don't know. You tell me.
Yeah. And so I don't think the answer should ever be like, go read this guide or go look at these videos.
Sure.
To make a good game. Although those can definitely be helpful, but my advice is particularly just before you go, if you are feeling overwhelmed by the monsters, just going off on an expedition quest, which those are the quests where you just go off in a zone. There's no time limit. There's no objectives. Just you like running around and doing whatever in these zones. Just go off on one of those and fiddle around with whatever your weapon type is, fiddle around with your exploration options, gather everything you can, and then just take a look at what you can craft from those. And just take the actual monster hunting part out of the equation and just take things, settle yourself in the world first and foremost. Then once you have done that, once you've gotten a feel, it's like, okay, this is how these areas interconnect. This is why I might want to take this route when exploring or going to find a monster. Then And then once you have found a weapon that clicks for you too, I think that's the most important part, is finding a weapon that suits you. Because I think a lot of people jump into the game and they just use the default weapon they give you, which in this case is the longsword. And the longsword can be newcomer friendly, but it's not for everyone still. And so once you have found a weapon that suits you, then you can go and just take on one of the lowest ranked monsters. Again, sticking to single player. Don't think about multiplayer, because multiplayer, there's a lot going on between all the other players and the canines happening. You're not going to really understand why people are doing what they're doing. So just take it slow on your own. And then the best I can say is don't there is a learning curve. You will die.
No. I think that's the thing to keep in mind, is that like for the people who don't know, maybe if there's some listeners who have never, who missed the news about this game. It's extraordinarily complex between the UI and the world and getting attacked by giant Tyrannosaurus looking dinos out there. It's very complicated. It's an action RPG, like at the very base level, but then everything beyond that is like pretty complex. So I think the thing to keep in mind is that, like, hey, it's what you just said. There's a learning curve. It's out there. You can't just dive in.
Yeah. And I think what also throws a lot of people off is the lack of health bars for the monsters. And it really catches them off guard just how long it takes to take one down. Like, if you're fast, you can take something down in like 10 or 15 minutes. But if you're just starting off, it really isn't uncommon for these hunts to go on for 20, 30 plus minutes. And that's just, that's something that catches a lot of people off guard, because they think, oh, the game gets compared to Dark Souls a lot in terms of difficulty. But even then, Dark Souls bosses, like, you either kill the boss or you are killed within like 5 minutes. And that's not the case for Monster Hunter for sure. And so it's like, you need to, ideally, you feel yourself learning and getting better. But that initial wall can definitely seem insurmountable in that regard. But I feel like Monster Hunter games do a decent job of portraying the damage to the monsters on themselves, like the way that their parts get broken and things like that. But yeah, it's not a game that you can just. It's unfortunately just not a game that you can just hop in and have a fun time right away. It's something that you go in, you get beaten up, but you feel like, okay, there's something here if I just practice this. And then you know that it will pay off in the end.
Right. So I guess the larger point is, do you feel like you're getting not getting rewarded, but do you feel like, yes, I have put in the effort and I'm reaping the benefits? Like that, like, do you personally, Matt, feel that way?
Yes, absolutely. And I think that really comes into play, like, once you have observed a monster and you understand its attack patterns and when to go in and when to go out. Like, Monster Hunter is all about a game that's all about knowing when to attack and when not to attack. And it's not a game that you can just, because there's no dodge canceling out of your attacks. You can't just like roll out of an attack mid-swing or anything like that. Once you start attacking, you are committing to that attack. And so once you have learned a monster's behavior enough to know, it's like, okay, he's swung that attack. I have like a few seconds here to get a few hits in, then roll back out, observe the situation again. Even though he's not attacking at this very moment, I don't want to go on myself because that might leave me open and things like that. Oh, he's done his big supernova attack. He's going to be vulnerable for a long time. Okay, he's enraged. Maybe I'll put a trap down just to give myself a little breathing room. Once you get to the point where you're making these microsecond decisions on the spot, that's when you really feel like it's clicking and that you are improving. And in my space specifically, even as a Monster Hunter veteran, because of the wirebug mechanics, I feel like I'm still learning too, and just all the ways I can utilize these wirebugs. One of the most satisfying things that I've done so far is using wirebugs to vault myself over monsters that are using some sort of like wide sweeping attack in front of them. It's just like, whoop, right over onto the other side. While you're finishing that attack, it'll just wail on your back. And it feels so good when you pull that off. It feels like you've truly outsmarted this monster. And you are reaping the benefits from it. And so Monster Hunter, yes, you are hunting monsters to build better gear, to hunt stronger monsters that make even better gear, and that's the entire progression loop. But the real rewards, just like the exploration, it's mainly intrinsic, just in the fact that you feel yourself getting better and you feel like you have truly triumphed over this greater force.
I think that's probably. I think you did a good job there of explaining the appeal of this kind of a game, because it really is. It's like the lone, well, not the lone adventurer, but it is the underpowered adventurer versus these seemingly impossible odds, and coming through that, I think, has a certain amount of satisfaction, I imagine.
Absolutely.
So that's awesome. Yeah, I want to throw it out to Marc and Campbell. Do you guys have any questions you want to ask for Matt, or just questions about the series in general? I know he's been talking for a long time. He's probably tired.
Yeah, I was just honestly sorry I didn't like say anything. I was just listening to you like the whole time, being like, now I'm debating whether I should get the game or not.
No, it's
like
something to
deep
be
in
sorry
so
about.
much right now, and now it's like, do I want to get back into Monster Hunter? I've already said this multiple times on the podcast. My experience with the series is like all over the place. Played it on PSP, played it a bit on the 3DS, played a lot of World. Do you think this game is really like a huge jump between like World and Rise, or like Generations and Rise, I should say?
In terms of Generations and Rise, yes, because Generations was still using the instance zones where like there were load screens between sections, and just that getting rid of that alone is game changing. But yeah, I think even taking that out of the equation, the wire bugs add so much to Monster Hunter Rise that, again, I can't imagine a game without it. And the exploration facet adds a whole new angle to Monster Hunter 2. And so I think in that regard, like even if you are feeling overwhelmed by Monster Hunter, just being able to go anywhere you want, exploring these really, really intricately designed zones is fun in and of itself. And then I think the biggest point, the most important point, is Monster Hunter Rise has doggos, has good boy dogs, whereas no other Monster Hunter does. So that's a major point in its favor.
Did you
Sold.
dress your dog as the Golden Retriever, the DLC?
No, I didn't. It seemed too out of place to me. Like, no, this is too
looks
real.
so
This is a little
adorable.
too real. Yeah, I don't want to have that guy fighting monsters for me.
So I
But
gotta
yeah,
ask, how's the doggo quality in this game, though? Like,
Can you pet the dog?
yeah, you can pet the dogs, right? And there are multiple
Yes.
pets?
Yes,
I've
there
heard
are
that right?
4 different pet animations.
Oh my god, okay.
Yep.
Matt,
Yeah.
give it to us
And,
straight. Are they good boys?
Oh yeah, they are absolutely good boys, and yeah, beyond the petting animation, like the little you've played, Mark, you probably know how you can cook raw meat on a BBQ spit.
Oh
at the
yeah,
very
yeah,
least.
of course.
Yeah, so when you do that in this game, like your dog will just like sit there and pant like very like, while salivating. He's like, give me. And it unfortunately it doesn't seem like I can give them the meat afterwards, not as far as I know, but it's just like little touches like that where you feel like, yeah, this is my hunting companion, like this is my partner. And
He doesn't have like a health bar or anything like that, though, right?
He does. Yeah, both your dog and your cat have health bars, but it's weird because I've never seen them run out of health, ever.
That's a good thing, though, right?
yeah, it
I
is a
can't
good-
stand to see a dog
As
get
they should
hurt.
be, yeah.
Yeah. So I'm not sure what the purpose of the health bar. Maybe I just haven't been paying attention, but yeah, in previous games when the companions ran out of health, they would just temporarily retreat, and you'd be on your own for a bit. But that hasn't happened to me yet. And
Yeah,
so
I know in World the Palicos would get like murdered by some of the bosses.
Yeah,
It was
yeah,
like
for sure.
ridiculous.
Yeah, and your companions are very helpful too, and what they can do. And so just in World with your Palicos, with all the gadgets they can use. But here they've really expanded it out, especially because the Palamute has their own entire different moveset as well. Like my favorite one is like there's this tool that enhances their jaws essentially, and so it gives them an attack where they will literally just latch onto a monster and just stay there and just like tear at it, and it distracts the monster. So you can go in and wail at it at the same time, and it's just so satisfying watching your dogs like, get him, yeah, get him, boy, get him, and just tear into them like that. It really caught me off guard the first time I saw it. Like, oh, whoa, okay, that's pretty visceral.
And you can still dress them up too, right?
Oh yeah, and you can still dress them up on all the different armor sets. The customization options are astounding. I was not expecting so many customization options for both the cats and the dogs, because it was definitely like kind of throwaway in previous Monster Hunter games, but they really went all in on it. Like a lot of my friends were designing their dogs to look like their own dogs. I know if I had a dog, I would probably do the same. But yeah, I was very impressed by how much control you over how they looked.
So you've kind of touched a bit on the new additions in terms of the Palamutes, right? But I'm also kind of curious about the monsters themselves. So in the time that you've played so far, are there any like either returning monsters or either maybe entirely new monsters, anything that's really like stood out, any like really cool new additions, or some like, do you have like a favorite monster thus far? Are there new or returning? Are there any cool changes they've made to that?
Right, yeah. So there's definitely a lot of returning monsters for sure. One of this is definitely not my favorite monster, but one that surprised me is the Royal Ludroth, which hasn't been in a Monster Hunter game since Monster Hunter Tri on the Wii. And so when I got a hunting quest for them, I'm like, whoa, okay, this is a blast from the past. Haven't seen you in a hot minute. But yeah, Monster Hunter games always has like a slew of returning monsters. Like the Rathian and Rathlos are mainstays. It's not a Monster Hunter game without those two. As far as new monsters go, I actually haven't fought too many yet because I'm just now getting to the point where I am fighting those. But there's like the Tetradon, which is, do you know what a kappa is?
A kappa,
like the monster from Japanese folklore.
Yeah, it's like a sort of frog duck-like monster in Japanese folklore.
It's
that
basically
has,
what a golduck.
Yeah.
looks
Oh,
like.
that thing. Yeah.
Yeah, it has
Didn't know
like
the
a
name
dish
of
on
it.
its head. Yeah, so it's kind of like a monster kappa, and it's also a sumo wrestler in the way that it'll kind of
Okay.
like pound its fins at you in a like, I don't know how to describe this in words. Just kind of like in the way a sumo wrestler would move, and then furthermore, it can inhale a bunch of rocks to inflate its belly, which it can then use to like slam down the ground for these shockwaves, and that like very iconic sumo wrestling move where they raise their foot straight up in the air and like slam it back down. It's just such a my favorite monsters are the derp monsters, the derp monsters that can still hurt you essentially, and the Tetradon is very, very much a derp. It's just, you can't not laugh when fighting it, but then you might get hit because you're laughing too much. The new flagship monster, the Magnamalo, is really neat, and it's Hellfire mechanics. So it's got this spear-like tail that can extend out like a telescope and like impale you, and then when it goes into rage, it conjures this hellfire around, this purple hellfire around it that it uses for its attacks. And so it can use its there's one of its attacks where it'll spin its tail around like it's gaining momentum, and it'll just like shoot it out in this shockwave sort of manner that will send you absolutely flying. It has this dive bomb move that's a supernova that explodes in hell flames, and you can use its hell flames against it by gathering them up and like setting them down in a mine if you set it up properly. It's a very unique fight in terms of how in terms of Monster Hunter goes, and that's something that I'm just really impressed by Monster Hunter as a series, is just how they continually make these monsters feel unique. It never feels like they're reusing ideas. I don't know how they do it. It's insane. Even like the Pidgey equivalents of Monster Hunter, which is like these Jaggy variants. Like each Jaggy variant still feel, even though they're using the same base models and they're using like they're the same bone structures, the same joints and all that, each and every one of them feels so unique. It's not just like a palette swap. It's a testament to the designers on the Monster Hunter team. So yeah, those are the ones that are standing out to me. Like I said, unfortunately, I can't speak to the later monsters that look really interesting to me. There's this one of the ice lands that will kind of like breathe ice onto its arm to create like the sword essentially that I've seen. It looks so badass. I have not fought it yet. I really want to. But yeah, there's a lot of neat ones coming up for me that I'm looking forward to.
That's great. Well, we'll have to. I'm sure you'll be writing a lot about it and talking a lot about it. So we'll have to all be on the lookout for Monster Hunter Rise updates from you, Matt. Anything else you want to say to kind of wrap up this discussion about this brand new game?
Yeah, I guess the last thing I'll say is just I'm very pleased that Capcom is not. Its success with World is not. They're not letting the success of World go to their head. It seems like they are going to be continually updating this game as well with brand new monsters, brand new modes. Oh wait! Oh my God! I never even talked about the rampages. So.
Oh yeah, like the big new thing they added. Awesome.
Yeah.
Great. Yeah. Let's talk about that.
So I've already been talking a long time, so I won't go on for too long on this. But rampages completely change up how you engage with Monster Hunter, and that it kind of turns into a tower defense game in a weird way. So rampage is you're defending Kamuta village from these onslaughts of monsters essentially, and so before each horde or wave, you go around and you set up these installments, whether they're auto turrets or they're like ballista or cannons in this case, manned by NPCs, or they're manual ones that you'll man yourself. And so once you set all those up, the monsters come and engage, and it's just all hell breaks loose. There is so much happening during these rampage quests. It's a lot of multitasking and understanding where everyone is, because some monsters will attack hunters, some of them will prioritize the gate, and you have to flit your attention between each and every one. It's actually, frankly, overwhelming in single player. They're definitely better in multiplayer, but I haven't done them too much, but I've enjoyed what I've played so far, and I definitely can't wait to see what it's like when I get on a call with 4 of my friends. We're all coordinating on voice chat for these higher level rampage quests. I think that will be really interesting. My one complaint about them is that they are kind of isolated, again, in their progression system, where yeah, you'll get a few monster mats from them, but for the most part, you're getting mats specifically for rampage quests. So you're doing rampage quests to do more rampage quests, but that also means you can more or less completely ignore them if you want to, because they don't carry over into the main Monster Hunter slaying action. So that, depending on how you look at it, might be a disappointment, or it might be a benefit if you don't like the rampage quests. I think that's kind of what Capcom is going for, because this was so experimental. They wanted to give players the option to engage with this, and if they wanted to do it more, if they have fun, but if they're not a fan of it, it's like, no problem, don't have to worry about it. So yeah, I enjoy them, and I definitely forward to digging into them more.
Well, I think the fact that you were able to talk about Monster Hunter Rise for 40 minutes and not even mention. Do you know what I mean? Or however long it's been. At least half an hour.
It has been specifically 38 minutes and 45 seconds.
Listen,
So-
I got a clock in my brain, I swear to God. Also a clock on my computer screen that I'm looking at right now too. But the fact that you're able to talk about the game that much without even mentioning like one of the giant new things that they added, I think speaks to just the amount of depth that there is to Monster Hunter Rise. So I think that's cool that they're trying something new in this pretty long-running and well-established series. That they're finding new ways to innovate. They're bringing it to a brand new player base. I think that's really incredible. So hopefully it'll speak to only good things for the future of Monster Hunter as a series.
For sure, I agree.
So all that being said, we're going to take another quick break. We're going to come back. Campbell's going to tell us about an indie game he's been playing. So stay tuned, and we'll be back in a second. So we thought we'd wrap up the show with a little indie spotlight. I'm going to give Campbell the last word, if you will, for this game called Lost Words. Wordplay. Campbell, why don't you take it away?
Well, I'll just stop typing my notes in Microsoft Word and then share some words about Lost Words beyond the page. But really, I'll just say that playing this game, it brought me back to my old arch nemesis being Google Stadia. Because this game debuted last year as a Stadia exclusive. It was one of like 5 games to ever be an exclusive to Google Stadia. And I thought it looked so cool when it was first announced. I watched the trailer because I had like a warped fascination with the Stadia at the time just to see what was happening with that train wreck. I was like, oh, this game looks pretty neat, but obviously I didn't buy it on Stadia. And now it's finally escaped the shackles of that doomed platform and it's come to Nintendo Switch. And it's just nice to be able to finally play this game because essentially Lost Words Beyond the Page is what you could call an emotional, narrative-driven platformer. And it essentially tells 2 stories at once. It's about this little girl, this little British girl named Izzy, and she's just writing in her journal, and you get to actually play through her journal. You play through like as this little hand-drawn version of her, just jumping on top of her words as she writes them, creating little doodles, just living through her daily life. And in the meantime, she's also trying to start writing a fantasy story, and you get to play through that fantasy world. So you're kind of getting these 2 games at once, the one in the journal, and then the one in the fantasy world, which is like your traditional kind of puzzle platformer. But then at the same time, where the emotions come in, is that Izzy's grandma has a stroke, and then she starts to deal with the fact that, hey, my grandma's going to die, you know, and
geez.
it does turn into a pretty tear-jerky kind of game, as it's this little girl coming to terms with mortality for the first time, coming to terms with how life ends, how you move on, how you honor somebody's memory, how, you know, you accept that these things happen, and yet also deal with personal responsibility, and like, did I cause this? Was I good to this person while they were alive? It actually dives into some really deep questions. And as she's dealing with those kind of personal crises and she's writing about them in her journal, they get reflected in the story that she's writing. So this story that starts out as this like upbeat fantasy romp turns into, I would say, almost like a Limbo-like dark reflection on responsibilities and morality and all that kind of serious stuff. So it's this really fascinating game that kind of blurs the lines between, you know, like puzzle gameplay, narrative, whether it's a linear platformer, whether it's more of a puzzle game. You know, I wouldn't say that the gameplay is really anywhere close to as engaging as the story is, but the narrative is really effective at creating these emotions and portraying just, you know, this very relatable experience that any young person can experience when the first time you see a family member start to die, right? So it's this very emotional, but overall, it creates such a memorable experience because of that emphasis on emotions, the way the story plays into the gameplay. It's definitely a tearjerker. Don't be surprised if you reach for the tissues by the time the credits roll. And even if the gameplay isn't entirely up to snuff with that, it's overall, I really enjoyed my time with it.
Interesting. I feel like platformers in particular do that kind of thing every so often, where they aim to, like, I'm thinking of like Gris from a few years back, where they're like, oh, we're aiming for a specific kind of tone, but we still want to make a video game. So rather than go like the visual novel route, they kind of layer in some platforming elements. I think that's it's interesting how that seems to be the case.
Yeah, I will say that Gris did a far better job of integrating its gameplay with, you know, the overall atmosphere that it was going for. There were still some pretty clever puzzles in Gris, whereas in Lost Words Beyond the Page, it's kind of frustratingly simplistic, I'd want to say.
Sure.
So let me talk a bit about the mechanics that you have in here. So
So my if I can interrupt you for a second. So I'm curious. So do you swap between the two not versions of the game, but do you swap between the two kind of aesthetics at a whim, or is it like specific story moments?
It's specific story moments.
I
So
see.
it starts out, she's writing in her journal, and she's like, this is what happened today. Okay, I better go back to writing my story. And then you play through the story.
I see.
And then you finish a chapter of the story, you go back to the journal, and, vice versa. It keeps just going on like that. And when you're in the journal, it's essentially just you walk over the words, and there are some words that are, say, glowing. You can interact with those words to change what's on the page. So you can jump on the word aquarium, and you'll see a fish tank appear. And then it talks about how Izzy and her grandma had a fish tank, and then they played with the fish, right? But in the fantasy portions, you have this magic book with you, and it has these words in it. You can take the words out and use them to interact with the environment. So, for example, you can use the word rise to get platforms to rise up, so you can, reach platforms that you couldn't jump to. Or you can use the word break to destroy walls that are falling apart. So you use those words to interact with the environment. That's really where the challenge and the puzzles come in. The problem is that the puzzles you see in the start of the game are essentially the same as the ones you get at the end of it. It doesn't really progress. It doesn't get challenging at all. It doesn't come up with new ways to use these words. It feels kind of one note to the point where, like, okay, I see this wall. I've got to use break on it time and time again. Or, oh, I see this fallen bridge, I need to use rise to get to come back up to the surface. So it is kind of frustrating in that regard, and it doesn't really keep the gameplay all that engaging. Like I said earlier, it's really the story that's a saving grace, and the way that the attitude intertwines with these gameplay mechanics that makes it worthwhile in the end. It's not one of those gameplay first games.
Right. So, okay, so then I guess my follow-up question to that is, like, how's the writing? Like, I feel like I've been toying with this idea for a long time about writing a piece about how video games are almost incapable of, at least to me, expressing grief, or like letting players, like, they can tell you, like, oh, God of War, like, Kratos' wife died. Like, they sure as hell can tell you it. But as far as, like, actually, like, letting a player, like, oh, wow, have a cathartic moment, it's pretty freaking hard to do that in a game, at least for my experience, as someone who's dealt with a lot of grief. Do you feel like the writing in this game handles this subject matter in an effective or appropriate way?
I would say yes. I would say that this is really one of the most effective portrayals of grief in a game that I can really think of. You brought up Greece earlier, which is also a game that deals with grief, but just in a very abstract manner.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's a very wordless game, very artistic, whereas this game is very concrete. You're seeing the world through the eyes of this little girl who, up to this point, has no concept of death, has no concept of life ending. And then she sees her grandmother, who she is extremely close with, have a stroke. She sees her in the hospital bed. She sees how she's not the same family member that she used to be, and she sees that happening. And as she's writing in the journal, the writing really does portray that kind of just that sense of absolute confusion, that sense of what is happening, I don't understand this. And not only the writing, but also the little visual touches that they throw in there, along with the journal, really just make it hit home even harder. Sometimes she'll draw, pictures of her grandma. She'll write out things like, Grandma always says, and then you write the phrase that she used to say. She'll draw these really abstract illustrations of her grandmother, and then in these rare moments where it kind of breaks out of that real world setting, and then the drawings kind of come to life, there's these really beautiful effects coming in where it's like representing the grand emotions and the feelings that she's experiencing. Even moments where you can just see her tears dropping on the journal as she's writing it.
Geez.
Yeah, it really gets in there, and it is really tough by the end of it. So I think they do a really solid job of portraying that, just like it's an absolute gut punch by the end of it, but it ends so beautifully, because it takes all these elements of grief. I'm not going to tell you exactly how it ends, of course.
No, sure.
But
I think honestly, Campbell, you've sold me on it. So please, no spoilers on the end of the game. Yeah.
Of course, no spoilers. I just want to say that the ending is absolutely perfect, because not just the ending in terms of how Izzy herself deals with her grief, but again, how the fantasy story, the world she's creating, ties into that. It is very, very impressive, let's say. Like, I could not have come up with a better ending for it. And again, even if the fantasy portion was like my least favorite part of the game to play through, I honestly would have loved it if the whole game just took place in her journal. But the way that it plays into the story, again, by that ending, is nothing short of incredible and awe-inspiring. So, yeah, it really does. It's an example of a game that uses every element in its toolkit, has a firm purpose in mind, pulls it all together for just a really touching and poignant message at the end of it.
Wow.
Cameron, I find it interesting what you said about grief before, because I think it really depends on like when. That's not really a good way to put it, but really when our grief begins. I think that's more of what you mean. Like, use Kratos as an example.
Sure.
And I feel like that's not really a fair comparison, because it sounds like from what Campbell's saying, you're seeing the character's death rather than Kratos, the character was already long gone. You know what I mean? So it's more so, it's,
Well,
it's
of
like a
course,
different type of grief in itself.
It's a different type of grief, obviously completely different kind of game. Like God of War is this big AAA experience, millions and millions of dollars behind it. This was probably made by a small team, probably a personal story from like, I imagine, one or two writers. Whereas, of course, Sony Santa Monica is bringing to bear their entire creative team to make their game. That's not to discount anybody who's moved by the storytelling in God of War, and it's perhaps ill-advised of myself to compare the two games. Like, this sounds like a really personal and beautiful game, Campbell, and it does sound like what Marc just said. They're taking a specific moment in time and capturing it, and I think that's a very powerful and useful thing to do, especially in a game. It's so rare in a game to really honestly explore this kind of thing. So to me, that sounds. I'm sorry if I'm getting emotional. I'm not trying to.
Yeah, no, I understand, definitely. And one other thing I want to say about this story that I think is just amazing is, like, Marc, you really hit on it in saying that everybody experiences grief differently. Everybody experiences their own kind of grief. But at the same time, there are some things that most people experience. Most people, when you're little, you see somebody who's close to you, pass away just because they're older, right? You see a grandparent, if they don't pass away, you see them get like dementia or something. They change, and the way that this game plays on to such a relatable and such a real world experience, like not everybody can relate to the experience of being the god of war, but everybody can relate to being a kid and just not understanding life, not understanding how these things work, wondering if what's happening is your fault, wondering if you could have done something different. You don't see a lot of games play on such real world concepts. I feel like a lot of games either take a very abstract approach or you take a very exaggerated or very, very dramatic approach. So seeing something that's so down to earth, so relatable like this, it really doubles down on making it so impactful. So that's really what I took away from playing this game. One of the things I really appreciated most about the kind of story it's telling.
Wow. Well, I can't wait to check it out. I think it sounds very special.
How long of a game it is?
It's called what's it called? Lost Words Beyond the Page.
It's Lost Words Beyond the Page, and it is a pretty short game as well. I don't know exactly how long it took me to play because of how, Switch counts hours. But I want to say it was roughly like 4 hours or so.
Oh, listen, Campbell, that's just right.
I know, right? Yeah.
You know what I mean? All games could shave a few hours off and it would be so good for me.
Exactly. This kind of story doesn't
Very
need
true.
20 hours of epic exploration.
Yeah, exactly. It sounds like they know what they're trying to say and they express it well.
Absolutely.
That's great. So yeah, you can check out Campbell's review of Lost Words Beyond the Page over on Goomba Stomp. I guess we're about wrapping it up here. Matt, thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. Always enjoy coming up in here and just coming for the ride.
Absolutely, man. And like, I truly cannot wait to read more of your stuff on Monster Hunter after you spend more time with the game, because you have a great way of expressing like mechanics and ideas of this game, like because I hear about this kind of stuff and I get overwhelmed. So I think it's cool to have somebody like you who just is like, no, let me break it down for you. So I appreciate your skill in doing so earlier in this episode.
Thank you. Happy to hear that.
Yeah, man, of course. I guess we should do our little sign off here. So I've been your host, Cameron Daxon. You can find me over on Twitter at ActionDaxon. Mark, where can people find me on the internet?
You can find me at the Marc Cal, and that's Mark with a C and Cal with a K. You can find me on Instagram and Twitter. I always post on there often. I just did a interview with Kevin Kiner, who orchestrated Star Wars The Clone Wars and Rebels, and he's orchestrating Star Wars The Bad Batch, which I'll have reviews out for. But yeah, you can check out my interview with him. That's my most recent article. I can't really talk about upcoming stuff, but you'll hear about it on the podcast in the coming weeks.
Sounds good. And Campbell, what about you?
Yeah, you can find me on Twitter at Campbell Gill, uppercase CSG. And of course, you can find all my games writing at goombastop.com. Like Cameron said, please check out my written review of Lost Words Beyond the Page to learn more about that kind of game. And look out this weekend for another indie game spotlight coming out. So please keep an eye on the site for the cool stuff coming out.
Cannot wait to see more spotlights. And of course, Matt, where can people find you on the internet?
I'm Matthew Ponthier. You can find me at musingmojack, MUSINGMOJACK, on Twitter and also Twitch. So if you want to see Monster Hunter in action, want to see what it's all about, I am streaming it this coming Friday. I'm not exactly sure when this episode goes up, but Friday, April 2nd, 7 p.m. Eastern Time. You can come check that out. Monday as well. And as well as the anime editor on Goomba Stomp. So we are going to be putting up our seasonal guide for anime. New season starting up pretty soon, so we're gonna go through, tell you what's good about that, what maybe to avoid, and yeah, that's where you can find me at MUSINGMOJACK.
Excellent. Oh, yeah, and of course, the host of the Anime Ichiban podcast as well.
Yes, that's right.
Gotta shout that out.
Yeah.
But yeah, looking forward to reading your anime guide because I always need a recommendation, frankly. So yeah, thank you so much for listening, everybody. You can follow the NXpress podcast at NXpress Nintendo on Twitter. We're also on YouTube now. We're NXpress Nintendo Podcast on YouTube, so make sure you like and subscribe and comment and all that kind of stuff. You can download the podcast, anywhere you find podcasts, so make sure you go do that. Rate and reviews, those are important, and it helps people engage and find the show, so make sure you do that when you have the time. Thank you for listening, and we'll catch you next time.